Okay, firstly, I must say that although I'm not a sociologist, this project benefited a lot from interacting with sociologists of culture and specifically from reading Moti's manuscript quite a while ago. 9 a.m. on a chilly Saturday morning. A group of 25 Israeli Jews is waiting in front of the Jerusalem municipality building for the tour to start. This is not the ordinary tourist menu, however, but a tour of Palestinian hummusiyot, or hummus joints, in East Jerusalem, curiously organized by Bet Shmuel, the Jerusalem branch of Progressive Judaism. Our friendly young guide looks more like the backpacker type than the type associated with the average gourmet. But like many other Israelis, he's a self-appointed hummus expert. The tour opens with the question, so, who does hummus belong to? Is it ours or theirs? Except for a couple of dissidents, the majority agree that it is theirs. Hummus for Arabs is a different matter than it is for us, explains our guide. We would describe any hummus as delicious. The Arabs have developed a taste for it for 2,000 years. In their mind, one has to keep high standards. By citing the number 2000, a constitutive number in the Zionist narrative of exile and return, our guide invokes the semiotic function of hummus as a signifier of locality. The tour progresses in a pastiche of history, mythology, folklore, and hummus lore. Accompanied by an armed security man, we walk from one Palestinian hummusiyah to the next, sample the hummus, discuss its qualities, and compare it to the others. I begin with the tour of East Jerusalem hummusiyot because it exemplifies two interconnected processes: the recent gourmetization of hummus in Israel and the re-emergence of its Arab identity after it has been submerged for decades. At the same time, the recent hummus craze, of which this tour forms a part, owes much to the perception of hummus as the most Israeli dish of all. How has an Arab dish come to function as a foremost signifier of Israeliness? And how has this symbol of Israeliness regained its Arab identity for the Jewish Israeli public alongside its Israeli one? Due to time constraints, my lecture will only focus on the second of these two questions. I will offer an explanation which anchors the changing signification of hummus in social practice. Contrary to accounts of food consumption, which regard food as metonymic of political relations, as in, for example, the eating the other framework, where the attitude towards the food of the other is supposed to reflect the political relationship one has with this other. I argue that since food items move in several fields, both their consumption and signification patterns are overdetermined processes. Rather than taking hummus to be the essential food of the other, I consider the Arabness of hummus a symbolic resource employed or otherwise repressed by various social actors who are embedded in various political, social, and economic projects. Now, hummus has for long held a secure position in the Israeli national food repertoire. Yet the title of a national dish does not fully capture the position of hummus in Jewish Israeli culture. Falafel too has received this title, and at times also the gefilte fish, but neither became the object of so much emotional investment as hummus. In the current Israeli discourse on hummus, there are ample descriptions of hummus as an indispensable dish and one of the main things that Israelis miss when they go abroad. Many people refer to themselves as hummus addicts, and everyone has her favorite hummusiyah, except for you. Israelis, together with the Lebanese and the Syrians, are the world's largest hummus consumers, and it is consumed by a broad cross-section of society. As Arjuna Padurai suggests, the emotional charge of food and its being a needed yet perishable good make food a marvelously plastic kind of collective representation which can signal rank and rivalry, solidarity and community, identity or exclusion, and intimacy or distance. In one of the sections of distinction, Bourdieu describes how a group's preference for certain foods is related not only to income and gendered division of labor, but also to embodied dispositions and habitus. In this sense, the Israeli manner of eating hummus, referred to in Hebrew as wiping as opposed to Palestinian dipping, the entire bodily hexis involved in its consumption, but also its amenability to being shared, eaten from a single plate, all these manifest the main qualities which Israelis like to associate with Israeliness, mainly informality to the point of rudeness, but also sociability. At the same time, the logic of associations and dissociations which food promotes seems to be more complex than Bourdieu allowed for when he distinguished food preferences along the axis of social position and gender alone. Tim Edelsohr has extended Bourdieu's notion of the habitus to the national field, arguing that class, ethnic, and gendered forms of habitus intersect with national dispositions. However, while a liking for certain foods embodies national belonging, no less embodied notions of how, where, and when to consume it is often divides the national community. As I will show below, Israel's passion for hummus has made it a favorable terrain for distinction practices, resulting in mutual reinforcement of social distinction and national belonging, as well as, paradoxically, in bringing the repressed Arab back in. Hummus was adopted by Palestine's Jews during the 1950s. In the course of this decade, it transformed from an Arab dish, or a dish considered to be part of the Arab food repertoire, recommended by nutritionists during the austerity period, to a so-called Oriental dish, usually consumed in Oriental restaurants, many of which were opened by Mizrahi Jews or Jews immigrants from Middle Eastern countries who arrived to Israel in large numbers after the foundation of the state. And it should be noted that that hummus was not part of the culinary repertoire of most of these immigrants prior to their immigration to Israel, but it became a standard dish on the menu of the Oriental restaurant. The industrialization of hummus in the late 1950s facilitated its penetration into the official repertoire of Israeli food, presented in various types of events and food exhibitions, both in Israel and abroad. Its Arab source in this process was suppressed, and it was marked either as Oriental or simply Israeli. Okay, so here we can see various advertisements for industrial hummus, where hummus is seen like this kind of all Israeli, implicitly Ashkenazi family. That's another brand who was apparently not so successful. So here we see the Oriental, but it's not Arab, but a kind of generic Oriental. And here, this man looks like more like a Yemenite Jew than anything else. And here, of course, there is this Oriental man serving the Ashkenazi family. Okay. These advertisements can be contrasted with the recent campaign of the Tzabar Food Company, one of the two leading Israeli industrial hummus manufacturers, to publicize its new line, the hummus of Nihad, the Jordanian. In this campaign, Tzabar had opened a makeshift hummusiya for Jordanian hummus chef Nihad El-Khan in Old Jaffa. And here is a short TV commercial.
والله انا هذه اخر صاحب حمص الى والله يا جاك انا تريد افضل الوكيل ايش كان في شيء ايش صحيح حمص عارفه حكايه السجراش اللي هذا يردني حمص بتصيف الكركرين
I think you get the point. Significantly, El-Khan was not a known figure in Israel, nor apparently in Jordan at the time. Rather, he was chosen by a Tzabar team which searched for both good hummus and a good life story to be presented to the Israeli public. and more hummus products bearing the names of Israeli Arab hummus chefs were to follow. Sabar's employment of Arab chefs to sponsor and promote its products responds to and at the same time advances the trend to consider Arab-made hummus as better and more authentic than Jewish-made one. This trend, which was incipient in the second half of the 1980s, increased in the 1990s and even more so in the 2000s. It resulted from interaction between processes occurring in the culinary field and in the field of politics. The 1980s were a decade of deep transformation in Israeli society and culture, which can be summarized under the title of economic and cultural liberalization. In this context, two interconnected processes are particularly relevant to our case. One is the rise of a new urban middle class, and this relatively wealthier middle class developed a cosmopolitan cultural orientation with a stronger emphasis on consumption and leisure than ever before. Out of this class emerged the agents of a new culinary model, which eventually restructured the entire Israeli culinary field. This model emphasized refinement, professionalization, and cosmopolitan authenticity. It constructed food as an object not only of sensual but also of intellectual engagement. A gourmet field has developed with its own institutions, experts, discourses, and practices. Food became an ever-growing component of Israeli leisure culture, and cooking-related TV shows flourishing and famous chefs becoming cultural heroes. The second process is the rise of identity politics and the search for authentic ethnic cultures. During the 1980s, the second and third generation of immigrants from Middle Eastern countries who had grown up in an atmosphere of contempt toward anything Oriental began to articulate their sense of difference into a set of cultural practices and products. In this process, the cuisines of Mizrahi immigrants were rediscovered, and food became central to the definition of the ethnic culture. Simultaneously, in the new elite culinary culture, both the ethnic, the foreign, but also the local became commodified options in a repertoire available for the construction of the new bourgeoisie cosmopolitan self. If at first the gourmet discourse was applied mainly to high-class restaurants and highbrow food, it soon came to be applied to ethnic food as well, including hummus. For instance, Israel Aharoni, a celebrity chef and one of the leading agents of this new culinary discourse, thus described the hummus in the Nazareth restaurant Ashek in 1997, and I quote, "The hummus, it should be stated immediately, was the best hummus I have ever eaten in my life. A pure hummus, very fresh, which had never seen a refrigerator, light and tasty. I have almost forgotten how tasty a good hummus can be. In the center of the plate was a pile of fool, which wasn't cooked to a mushy texture, and a puddle of excellent olive oil on the plate completed the whole affair." So the Israeli omnivore was born. However, as Johnston and Bauman have shown in their analysis of American gourmet food writing, the switch to omnivore food practices does not mark the end of food consumption as distinction. Rather, distinction is marked by other means, mainly along the axis of authenticity, which itself stands for a range of other values like geographic specificity, simplicity, personal connection, and historicism, or food grounded in tradition. With the entry of hummus into the Israeli gourmet discourse, it has undergone differentiation both along geographical lines and along quality lines. The standard Oriental restaurant is distinguished from gourmet hummus from a top hummusiya, which itself is an internally divided category with qualities like freshness, lightness, texture, and quality of ingredients as the main distinguishing criteria. Finally, Arab-made hummus is distinguished from Jewish-made hummus and deemed better and more authentic. Two other trends important from Europe and North America increased the reputation of Arab food in general and of Arab hummus in particular. One was the revaluation of local food in the 1990s. The other was the growing popularity of the Mediterranean diet due to health reasons. In this context, we find left-of-center Israeli chefs and food experts proclaiming Arab foods to be the quintessential local cuisine since adapted to the condition of the land. For instance, food writer Eli Landau writes, the Arab cuisine may not be as perfect as the French or Italian ones, but it is perfect in its connection to the land, its climate and fragrance. The main concept anchoring the distinction between Arab and Jewish hummus in this discourse is historicity, as we have seen in the introduction to the hummus tour. For example, Yehuda Litani in his book writes that a copy is never exactly identical to the source, and close as it may be, there will still be differences, sometimes even essential differences. Not only in the long tradition, where Palestinians have a clear advantage over most of the descendants of various diasporas in Israel, but in skills and patience. Interestingly, while the distinction between Arab and Jewish food is rooted in Orientalist discourse, the identification of the natives with tradition, their closeness to nature, their patience, at the same time it serves to account not only for the Arabs' better skills at food preparation, but also on occasion for their presumably stronger connection to the land. In contrast to the elitist notion of gourmet food, in the case of a lowbrow food turned object of distinction strategies, apparently everyone is welcome to join the game, at least as long as they possess the necessary cultural capital, that is. Thus, the discourse of authentic Arab hummus is promoted both by food experts and by various cultural intermediaries, mostly of a leftist political orientation, regardless of their culinary expertise. So meditations on hummus by the latter are often accompanied by erudite discussions on the history of the dish, its nutritional qualities, or the sociology of its consumption. The logic of distinction through consumption of lowbrow food propels hummus experts to perpetually search for yet undiscovered hummusiyot in authentic places, mainly Arab towns and neighborhoods. Writes, for example, Litani in his column in the Tel Aviv Weekly Ha'ir about the hummusiyah of Abu al-Abed in Palestinian North Jerusalem, I quote. I took Eyal Shani there, the owner of the Ocean restaurant in Jerusalem. He finished the dish hurriedly and said immediately, I prefer the hummus here to a 3 Michelin star restaurant in Provence. I took Sherry Ansky, the writer of Ma'ariv food column there. She dipped and exclaimed, that's it, this is the best hummus I've ever eaten in my life. The rise of the prestige of Arab hummus was also influenced by the peace process in the 1990s, which opened up new or all new territories for food consumption. According to Rebecca Stein, the peace process advanced practices of tourism to Arab sites in Israel, including food tourism. However, while the prestige of Arab hummus has not declined and even risen since, visits to Arab localities are strongly influenced by the political situation. Thus, for instance, after the outbreak of the Second Intifada in 2000, Jews refrained from visiting Arab Jaffa for some time, and many new hummusiyot were opened in Tel Aviv, some of which were operated by Jewish owners, but with Arab chefs. It seems that more than real voyages to Arab localities, it was in the imaginary voyages to neighboring Arab countries which boosted the reputation of Arab hummus. The peace accords with Jordan in 1994 and the peace talks with Syria in 1999 opened up new spaces for the projection of food fantasies, including hummus fantasies in particular. While the logic of distinction determined that the more authentically Arab the hummus, the better it is, the Orientalist logic conferred stronger authenticity to unknown regions. During the talks, various items on food in Jordan and Syria appeared in the Israeli press. Writers stated that the best hummus in the world can be found in Damascus and Beirut. Hummus in Damascus became such a common trope for peace with Syria that several right-wing ideologues had written that the Israeli left is willing to forego the material and spiritual assets of the Jewish people in return for a bowl of hummus. With the advent of the peace process, but no less with its decline in the late 1990s, various left-leaning writers promoted the Jewish taste for Arab food in general and for hummus in particular as a signifier of cultural closeness. it was often stated that hummus is the real Arbeiter in the Middle East. Writes, for instance, travel writer and journalist Tur Shezaf, and I quote, "This dish has become the cement that connects Jews and Arabs, right-wing and left-wing, and is the real foundation on which true peace will be established between the Euphrates and the Nile." So to sum up, the re-emergence of the Arab identity of hummus, more than reflecting changes in the relationship between Jews and Arabs, resulted from social transformations in Israeli society as they articulated in the culinary field. As a highly popular and emotionally charged national food, hummus became a terrain for distinction strategies, whereas the search for authenticity increased the symbolic value of Arab hummus, first promoted by food experts and various cultural intermediaries, often with a leftist political orientation. By turning to gourmet Arab hummus restaurants, they distinguished themselves from the masses along both political and culinary lines.